So as the screen says, this is the talk on interview prep for the culture. Hopefully this is where you want to be. If not, I'm glad to have you anyway. I know we're getting toward the end of the conference and trying to keep energy up will be a task. So thank you for coming to this talk. So as we get into it, no problem. I'm going to be using this talk to talk about a series of opportunities. And in order to do that, I'm just going to simply tell a story. It'll be story time, or in some traditions we call it, I'm going to share my testimony, right? But either way, I will go through and talk through the series of opportunities that I've had in my engagement with Florida A&M University. So as I do that, I do want to give one quick disclaimer, because I know the talk is kind of about how we can show up for HBCUs, but this story will be about like one engineer, right, from one company, talking with one department at one school, right? And as I tell this story, I want to be really clear that there was like a context that I came into that I benefited from, and that the history of FAMU goes well beyond the history of Microsoft. And so hopefully that'll show up in the story as we tell it. So before we do that, who am I, right? So I will talk about the last 20 years of my life in 4 logos. So first, I graduated from Washington University in St. Louis, where I earned my bachelor's and master's in computer science. After graduating from WashU, I joined Microsoft as a software engineer on the Internet Explorer team, where I was a part of building the web platform in IE as an engineer. And I was a part of shipping IE 8, 9, 10, and 11, and then eventually Microsoft Edge. So I was on that team for 10 years, and then eventually left Microsoft to go to Mozilla, and I worked on Firefox Reality, which was a VR web browser. And then after that, ended up coming back to Microsoft, where I'm an engineering manager in Microsoft Word, which is where I am today. So I bring this up a little bit because as I tell this story, y'all might think I'm a full-time recruiter. I'm actually not. Like the bulk of the time and energy that I've spent throughout my career is writing code and shipping world-class software. All right, so let's jump into the story. So let's talk about the original dilemma. Here's a picture of me from my first week at Microsoft in 2008. And as I joined the team, joined IE, which I was really excited and proud of, I had the story that I know a lot of folks may relate to of like, oh, like, am I the only one? Nah, I just ain't seen everybody yet, right? So as the weeks go by, months go by, it turns out, yeah, I'm the only black developer on my team. And initially, I was kind of angry. I was like, wait a minute, this is Microsoft, right? Like, they can get more than just one, right? And at the time, right, like I ended up calming down a little bit and realizing, oh, wait a minute, let me look back behind me real quick because I was the only black CS major that graduated from my class at WashU. So I'm like, they got me, so maybe that's that's where we get, right? Let's celebrate that. So from that, that's still in the back of my mind, right? Like I'm the only black engineer, I wanna make that better, but also I needed to work on myself and become more established and stable as an engineer and build my career. So like that's what I spent like the early years of my career working on, like how do I be successful on my own? But over time, as I become more established, around the 5 or 6 year mark, I start to look into interviewing. How do I learn how to interview? So I started to shadow some principal engineers on my team and learn how to do technical whiteboarding software engineering interviews. And then after a while, I started to do interviews on my own. And so now I am in Redmond, in Seattle, doing final round interviews as candidates come for opportunities. And that's cool, right? Because this is going to help me be a friendly face for people as they're coming in, for particularly black folks that I'm interested in seeing come to the company. But the dilemma from that is that I didn't see any black candidates in final round interviews, right? Now, to be clear, I love everybody, so I was happy to interview anybody, right? But like where the motivation for it was to see more black engineers at the company. So let's talk about the opportunity. In the fall of 2016, there was an email sent to my team in IE, or Edge, or whoever we were at the time, for an opportunity to do a campus trip to FAMU. And this would involve participating in their career fair and then doing on-campus interviews. So when the email was sent to the team, it wasn't framed as like, we're trying to recruit Black people and this is for HBCUs. I just knew it because I knew FAMU was an HBCU. So I was like, I'm gonna show up, like maybe I can play a part in helping to bring Black candidates to campus. So I signed up for it, and it was a pretty quick turnaround. I think from the time we got the email to the time I was on campus, it was like a week and a half. So it was a pretty quick turnaround that fall. So to give a little context of what was going on leading up to that, I want to bring in a voice into the story, and that is with Keisha. Keisha was the HBCU recruiting coordinator at Microsoft at the time, and she'll talk about some of the strategy with HBCUs and FAMU.
Historically always recruited at HBCUs because we recruited in all colleges around the U.S. And globally as well, right? But for HBCUs specifically, our new chairman at that time really felt invested in the opportunity for us to go back to historically Black colleges in person to recruit. So he actually invested into Microsoft, a team that I became a part of that would now figure out our strategy in going to campus and representing Microsoft and learning more about historically Black colleges.
And so that was the context of me coming into campus. So I'm excited, right? I'm on the plane to Tallahassee, and I'll get a chance to help be a part of bringing and finding Black talent to Microsoft. So from that opportunity comes another dilemma, right? So now I'm here, I'm at the career fair, meeting students, looking at resumes, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, actually, this is great. I love Black people and they're here, but like a lot of the students are not as prepared as I would like for the technical roles that we're looking for. And so this was kind of like my own, I guess, moment where I had to like realize the expectations that I had that I didn't realize I had. I just want to go and find Black people, right? But actually, there's a dilemma here as I'm trying to reach this goal. So an opportunity came from that. One of the students that I met at the career fair, whose resume that I looked at, is a student named Jay. And that Friday of that trip, I'm doing interviews, and I'm on my lunch break in between interviews, eating a chicken sandwich or something like on a park bench on campus. And Jay saw me and said, hey, what's up? So he sat and we talked for a while. Now, earlier that day, Jay had an interview with Microsoft for a different role with a different recruiter, which I didn't know about at that time. So we started to talk about the interview, and we started to talk about other things with the company. As we talked, he talked about his interview and about like he didn't feel as prepared for it either. And as we talked about it, like some of the observations that he had, that I had right before talking to him, he kind of confirmed it, right? As he's also talking to his friends and like the experiences that they're having as they're learning about Microsoft and trying to figure out like what the expectations are. The thing that was interesting in talking to him is not only did he see this, but he actually wanted to do something about it. And I was like, oh, okay. So I told him, all right, if you can get students together in a room, I'll talk about what it means to be prepared. What does it look like to prepare for interviews at Microsoft? So over the coming weeks, like he took it and he ran with it. So he found a way to get students together. He talked to a few professors and instructors who ended up giving credit to students who attended this thing that we created and would do a write-up on what they learned from it. And so we did it. We ended up having a Skype call for this event. I'm in Seattle and they're in Tallahassee in a classroom. And I did a quick presentation on what it looks like to prepare for technical interviews. There were about maybe 15 or 20 students that showed up, which was way more than I expected. And so that was an opportunity that just kind of, serendipitous, that I was happy to take advantage of. So from this, like I got an excitement and energy, right, from that initial thing. The connection that I had with the school started to feel like mutual and started to feel actually kind of easy, right? Now this is great. I have a new dilemma. I want to get more involved, right? Like this is cool. Like there's an opportunity like to continue this connection. So as I came back from that trip, like I connected with the recruiting team at Microsoft, and I was like, hey, I want to do more. Like I want to go back to FAMU anytime Microsoft ever does anything. And so I ended up making 2 or 3 more trips throughout the school year. And this, I thought it was a video, but it's not playing. And this picture is from a tech talk that they asked me to give, where I talked about software or something. And another thing that I did as well is that as students from FAMU who came to Redmond for final round interviews, I would try to like get their schedule and try to connect with them at some point while they were in Redmond. So again, there could be another friendly, familiar face as they were interviewing for their opportunities at Microsoft. So this is cool, like getting involved is great, but it takes time, right? Like as I told y'all, I'm an engineer, I already have a job, and I also have a life outside of work. And you know, this is eating up into the different responsibilities that I have. So another opportunity came up. In the spring of 2017, I looked at an opportunity to change teams. And while changing teams and working with, and talking to the hiring manager, I was pretty clear about like, I want to continue this engagement with FAMU, and I want to be a part of increasing the number of Black engineers at Microsoft. So one of the things that I did, which felt like a really big risk for me at that time in my career, was to ask for 10% of my time dedicated to this effort. And so when I say I want 10% of my time, that means I will be 90% engineer, right? I don't want to be 100% engineer and then another 10% on top of that trying to like do all of this work. I wanted Microsoft to contribute to this time as well because I think Microsoft would benefit from it. So I want to introduce another voice into the story, and this is Ed, who was the hiring manager, who became my skip manager, and I reached out to him a couple weeks ago to ask him his response, his reflection on the 10%.
I guess my first reaction was that's a modest price to pay, right?
Sure.
For whatever return might come from this engagement, right? Like 10% from someone who cares and someone who wants to go and get involved, that feels like nothing, right? And the activity is very much aligned with Microsoft's spirit, values, goals, right? That, you know, it feels like nothing, right? It feels very easy to support that.
And he really, really did support me, right? So not only did he, support the time in order to do it, he also gave me connections to other leaders within our organization as I'm trying to get visibility into this work. So Ed was a really, really big supporter in that. So now I want to, will it play? Yeah. So I want to take a quick break. In the summer of 2017, we had some of our first hires from that fall of recruiting. And these were the tech hires that I was a part of helping to bring into the campus. So I already talked about Jay, who was in the story that I told earlier. Jay and Kawane, who's not pictured, were the 2 full-time hires that started that summer. And then Sabrina and Greg were interns, software engineering interns, who ended up coming back full-time as well. And one of the things that I realized as I was preparing for this talk is that, oh wow, right? Like this was 5 years ago and they're still at the company. And it's like, I didn't think about it until working on this talk. I was like, wow, I'm actually really happy and proud of them for the career that they built so far in this time. And also, they knew I was doing this workshop, and so I asked them to say hi, and that's what they were waving earlier. Okay, so now, as we go into the fall of 2017, now I'm coming back and things are a little bit more familiar, right? Like I'm not coming onto the campus for the first time. I'm here for the career fair. I have better expectations on what's going to happen. And one of the things that happened is that, again, the interns who were there the summer of 2017 are now back on campus. So Sabrina, whose picture was in the previous slide, she actually introduced me to the department chair of the CS department, and whose name was Dr. Jones. And through Dr. Jones, he invited me to join their, they have a corporate external advisory board, which is made up of representatives from different companies who just partner with the department on anything that they need. And so also from that, this recruiting trip, we did a little bit more. So instead of just a career fair and interviews, we did a few events on campus where students can get to know a bit more about Microsoft. And one of them, we have frequently asked questions. And of course, questions came up again about interviewing. So I gave my standard answers, talked about interviewing. And as I looked around in the classroom, I saw there were some whiteboards. And I was like, well, if anybody is still interested, we can do some whiteboarding after the event. And so we finished up, the event, and then maybe about, again, another 15 or 20 students stuck around. And so we ended up taking over that classroom and the classroom next door that had more whiteboards. And we spent like another hour and a half just doing problems, right? Like practicing the ability to like solve problems out loud on a whiteboard. And here's a few pictures from that. Yeah, and another thing, as the connections are getting deeper and wider, like now I'm a little bit more familiar with FAMU and Tallahassee. Like I don't need a map every time I need to do something. And even now students, especially in the CS department, are recognizing me as the Microsoft guy, like even if I'm not wearing a Microsoft t-shirt. So now, as I get more involved with FAMU, and I'm involved with the External Advisory Board, getting to know the professors and stuff on campus, I'm seeing that like, all right, now I'm not only interested in the interest of Microsoft, but also FAMU as well, right? And so as my original goal when I came to campus, I'm like, I want to go find Black people, I want to go find talent. But now as I'm having this access and these opportunities, now my goal is changing from like finding talent to creating talent. And so now as I have a voice in the advisory board, I can give input on curriculum stuff, right? And as I'm getting to know students, I can kind of like encourage and nudge them to do some things that they might not do before, like take that harder class or like try that opportunity, right? That can help make you a more competitive candidate for Microsoft or probably anywhere else too. And so now like my goals are kind of shifting as I'm getting more involved on campus. So as we go into the spring of 2018, Dr. Jones, the department chair, asked me to connect with Dr. Allen, another professor in the department. And he wanted us to come together to do something, right? And the something that we ended up doing was creating an interview prep event. Dr. Allen was really, really clear and upfront on wanting to make something that was fun, right? That would make something that would engage the students, that would want to bring them out. So he wants like snacks and food and stuff and giveaways and prizes to kind of attract students to this event. And during this event, we would find a way to just help students prepare for technical interviews. So on my side, I worked to find engineers in the company who could do mock interviews with students. And I also worked with the recruiting team to secure funding for the event. And then on his side, Dr. Allen worked with some of the professors and even other students to socialize the event and get energy and excitement around it. And then the two of us together, we worked together to create the programming for the event, where I brought to the table, like, these are the things that we're looking for from candidates for our technical roles at Microsoft. And then he was able to bring, okay, these are the things that FAMU can offer students in order to, be prepared in those areas. And we kind of brought that together to give like a path for students to succeed in being more competitive candidates. So the event actually went pretty well, right? This was on a Saturday. I think a Saturday morning, right? We had this many students show up. And we had a couple of engineers from Microsoft come to Tallahassee, and we split up in groups and did practice some whiteboarding, practice strategies for solving problems with whiteboarding. And I think, yeah. And so now I want to introduce one more voice to the presentation, and that's with Ms. Brown. She's the corporate relations coordinator at FAMU, and here are some of her reflections from that event.
I know hitting the ground running, Microsoft came in and started doing technical workshops. And that was a big thing for our kids. We prepped them really well when it comes to the behavioral interviews and going into the first rounds of being able to make it to that second round. But it was that second round where our students were kind of falling short. So Microsoft came in, hit the ground running. We started doing, had a weekend workshop where they did whiteboarding in the classroom, and that was just really, really beneficial. And to have the students to come out on a weekend, we started on a Friday and we ended on a Saturday, having the kids to come out and they were excited. that was a really, really big thing, and it was very helpful, and it also allowed the students to be able to see, oh, these are some of the things that I need to focus a little bit more on when I'm in this particular class, or I need to go over and talk with this professor about being able to do this way or do that way. So it helped them to kind of like think, help them to plan, and help them to prepare for what was getting ready to come, in front of them in terms of being able to get the internships, in terms of being able to get the jobs.
And so coming from that event in the spring of 2018 into the fall of 2018, now this is my third fall coming back to campus. And I feel like I really know what's going on, right? That fall we did something yet a little different again with recruiting. So the typical thing we do is show up the week of the career fair, and then find candidates, talk to them, collect resumes, and then at the end of the week do first round interviews to determine who we should send to Seattle for final round. That fall we did something different. We did a prep trip a couple of weeks before that, and it was not a conventional recruiting trip. The sole purpose of that trip was to help prepare students for when we came back a couple weeks later. So we did resume reviews, we gave feedback to students that they could turn around within a couple weeks for when we saw them again. We did a few more mock interviews with other engineers who came in for the event, for that week. And then we just did what we could just to give, right? To just show up and be present with students and faculty on campus. So yeah, that fall, right, it felt, right, the most fruitful in the engagement that we had so far. At this point now, students knew what to expect they knew what we expected for our technical candidates as they're coming through Microsoft. And they also were coming to us for the resources to help them prepare for it too. They kind of knew to expect that as well. And that felt really good to me. All right, another dilemma. So now I'm changing companies. And for reasons that I won't go into, I ended up joining Mozilla after leaving Microsoft for 10 years. And similarly to how I joined that other team in the spring of 2017 at Microsoft, as I talked to the hiring manager at Mozilla, I wanted 10% of my time again dedicated to continuing this relationship. And so I did. And in the spring of 2019, came back to campus again, this time on behalf of Mozilla. And one of the things that made joining Mozilla appealing to me is that as I made the request for the 10% time, not only did he agree to it, but he actually gave me some ideas that I hadn't thought of because Mozilla is a different context than Microsoft. So the opportunity came from one of his ideas. So as folks probably know about Mozilla, right, all of their products are open source. And specifically with Firefox, it has a very, very vibrant community of contributors to the browser and other Mozilla products as well. And so one of the opportunities that he pitched that really, really got my attention is that, again, as I'm trying to find ways to help create talent, one of the sets of contributors in this community are students, are college students. And so what if, right, I helped bring opportunities to students at FAMU to be able to contribute to open source projects such that they could have on their resume, I'm gonna make it up, fixed 6 bugs in Firefox that impact millions of users. Well, shit, right? What more can you do to help create talent, right? And or if they worked on a project that I worked on, right? Help improve the 3D UI for a virtual reality browser, right? Those would be amazing things to put on a resume, and it's something that it's an opportunity that I could provide that I couldn't do at Microsoft. Another thing that came with this is, Mozilla is a lot smaller company. And I'm also on the advisory board. So now there's more opportunities to connect with the other companies who are also trying to do things at FAMU. So similarly to the tech interview prep event from the spring of 2018 that Dr. Allen and I collaborated on together, now we're trying to make it so that more companies can participate instead of it just being a Microsoft-only thing. So as we went into the spring of 2020, now we're preparing for another version of this event that involved not just Microsoft and not just Mozilla, but other companies on the advisory board. I probably don't have to tell you what happened with that. We didn't have the event. So we went through our own version of denial, right? Of like, oh no, we can still do it. And then the week of, we canceled it and we're like, that's okay, this thing will blow over, we'll reschedule in a couple of weeks. But at this point, it's been 2.5 years later and I still haven't actually been back on campus yet at FAMU. Yeah. So from this dilemma then came another opportunity, right? So like now that we're virtual, and now that we can't do things in person, then, Okay, now that we're virtual and we're not doing any more in-person events, what does it look like to maintain the momentum and the relationships that we have between like myself and the company that I'm at and FAMU? So some of the things we did was trying to stay in touch with Ms. Brown and the other professors, trying to stay a little bit involved with the advisory board. Like the activity of that kind of waned a little bit because, during this time, not only are companies trying to figure out what is work, right, but a lot of colleges are trying to figure out what is college, right, if you're not doing things in person. So things were a little weird. One of the opportunities that Ms. Brown invited the companies to participate was like e-mentoring of students who were taking their professional development class. So I did that, and yeah, just tried to stay connected some kind of way. Here's Ms. Brown sharing a reflection on how we maintain connection throughout my entire time of engagement.
I was starting out, I remember way back when, starting out, it was, Microsoft is coming to the campus, and anytime you mention the big companies, the students get, really giddy and they're excited and ready to interact, not really knowing what that interaction will entail or how it will go. But I know initially when we started out, I had no idea that it would turn into more of even though it's a partnership, it's it's family members coming home to kind of like check on their other family members. Microsoft is coming to FAMU campus, to the CIS department, to check on their babies, which are our CIS students. And Microsoft has always been centered on making sure that our students are prepped and ready, for whatever may come their way in terms of being able to get those internships, being able to get their foot in the door of the company. And they've been really, really good about hiring our students for internships and hiring our students for permanent employment. So the interest that they have taken into this department and the amount of time and effort and just the monetary value of pouring into the department and making sure that when they're here doing workshops, that the students are comfortable and relaxed and they have snacks and things like that, because snacks are important. That's what get the kids out. But we form more of a family type of relationship as opposed to it being just corporate coming in and trying to recruit or interact with faculty and staff. It's family coming home for interaction.
So I don't have any follow-up on that. So the last thing I want to talk about, as I told this story, has been a series of dilemmas and opportunities. The last one, the opportunity, fortunately had no dilemma, and it's just to tell this story. As I said at the beginning of the talk, or maybe I didn't say it, like I didn't actually plan on how this went out, right? Like hopefully that was evident throughout the story. And when I started doing this 5 years ago, I certainly didn't expect to be in a room talking to people about what happened. But I do count this as one of like the biggest privileges in my career as an engineer, to be able to have an impact in many different venues. It doesn't happen that often in my life and in my career that I get to do something where everybody is winning, in a particular collaboration. So whether it's managers like Ed, whether it's recruiters like Keisha or Kamara or Andrea, whether it's other engineers, whether it's faculty and staff at the university, or various students, I'm really, really grateful and actually consider it a blessing to be able to do that. So I'm going to have Ed and Keisha and Ms. Brown again share a few more reflections. I'm going to try to make them, there we go.
Right, so I think it benefited me, it benefited you. I think we saw, at least during our time together, we saw little we didn't have, for example, a recruit that came to the team that we were on, right? That, so I didn't see that kind of thing. But it was more an investment in understanding what a process, what an engagement like this would look like, right? And that's what felt like, that was what I got out of it. That's what I could take back to my organization. That's what I can speak authoritatively about this now with others at the company. And so that's what I think the company got out of it, right? But like the things we learned about, working with FAMU, right? Working with the administration, the instructors, what you would bring back about like the kind of situation on the ground with the students, what they knew, what they didn't know, how we could, all that was at a minimum super enriching, right? Mm-hmm. Just to know that, right?
There's a reason why we find talent from historically Black colleges, and it's not necessarily the first reason that people think of. So we're a technology company that creates technology for the world, right? And so when you go to an historically Black college to find talent, you're finding people who are in a lived environment learning from other people of color, right? And so their lived experiences in college, their experiences of working with those professors, the professors' experiences, all of those experiences go into our user experiences. Once you have that level of energy, imagine what that energy does when you drop it into a place like Microsoft, and now you have someone at the table who can tell you what it's like to live and work and be amongst people of color all day and what's important to them. So they deliver a certain level of inspiration that comes from the lived experience that they've had going to a school and being in an institution taught by people of color.
So having Microsoft to come in and say, okay, I need you to come in and talk on a particular topic, and then they come in, they bring their troops in, and they just lay out the gamut in terms of being able to show the kids these are some of the things that you need to look into, how you need to kind of like market your time or go out and learn these particular skill sets, and then when you come back and interview, you'll be ready. Those are some of the things that I have seen being in the department and being able to help corporate people come in and work with our students. Those are some of the things that that I appreciate and that I think helps a lot.
So now that I've told the story, this isn't like a typical talk where I have like this agenda, right? Like the only thing I really want to do was tell a story. But as I think back, there are three things that I can say where I might not have been able to say it at the time, but I was pretty intentional about. So the first part is opportunity, which was kind of easy to tell with the story, right? As I'm looking at dilemmas and opportunities. If an opportunity came my way and it helped me reach my goal of helping to increase the number of Black engineers at Microsoft, I just did it, right? Like that's, point blank. The second one is agency. So, as y'all can see, and as I've talked about, like I'm Black, right? But even as a Black man, I carry a lot of privilege because I work at Microsoft. And it's no secret that Microsoft is a really, really large company, probably one of the biggest tech companies in the world with a really, really big market cap and has a lot of influence. And so it was important to me that as I interacted with FAMU, with students or faculty and staff, that I maintain their agency, right? And when I say agency, right, like where whatever I did, whatever we did, like that they had a choice and they had a voice in whatever we did, especially in their space. So I was really intentional about that. And then the third thing is dignity, kind of similar to the first part, or the thing about agency. It was really, really important to me that we maintain the dignity of everybody involved, especially on the FAMU side. This especially showed up for students even who might not be competitive candidates, right? But if I'm going to interact with them, I'm going to find how can I help raise the tide for everybody involved, whether they'll come to Microsoft or not. It's no secret, I guess, FAMU is a good school, but nobody's comparing it to a MIT or a Stanford, right? But I strongly and firmly believe that Microsoft had more to benefit from these candidates who are coming in than them benefiting from us. That's my story. Thank you. Are there any questions? There were quite a few things that I glossed over because I was like definitely afraid of running over time. So there's some things that I can bring up or other details I can share. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so bear with me.
Yeah.
I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
So did you notice a disconnect in the curriculum when you started working with them than you would have noticed maybe from a PWI?
So not directly. One of the things so I feel like the students that were prepared were generally prepared, right? Like as far as like getting the exposure to the material that they had. One of the initial things that did seem pretty stark was like the interview prep. And I think, one of the things I could have gone into in the slides, in my original observations on campus is I'm noticing that some of the students aren't prepared. I actually compared their experience with mine because I did go to a PWI. And one of the things that I realized was like, I didn't have like all that intentional engagement with the company to prepare for my experience for interviewing with Microsoft. But what I did have were classmates and upperclassmen who interviewed or interned or worked full-time at Microsoft. So like there was this network kind of built in of like knowing what the expectations were that a lot of the students didn't have. So one of the engagements that I did with the recruiting team, or one of the, this really long email that I sent was like, okay, if we're coming to FAMU in person again, then we should keep coming, because I wanted to help create like a virtuous cycle, right, between the expectations and experiences of getting a job at Microsoft and have that be a part of like the culture and the conversation that students are having on the ground. And so that was what I saw, like that was what I was trying to help jumpstart, right, as I was trying to just be on campus more until like I didn't have to be as much. So like, oh.
I was just gonna say, it sounds like you created the possibility because
Yeah.
if you don't, like sometimes you get out of school, you take one job and you gotta get that training first before you can transition somewhere
Right.
like a Microsoft
Right,
or
right.
Google or Netflix or
Right,
these
right.
the big companies.
Right.
So I appreciate that. And then another question I had, how did you get buy-in for things like that? I know you asked for 10% of your time, but for a company like mine where it's 125 people versus you have 125,000 people.
Right. right.
How do you get buy-in like that to do something like this?
Please repeat the question.
Yeah, so the question was, what are the things that I did to get buy-in, especially compared to my situation at a really, really large company and yours at a smaller company? So one of the things that I tried to do was to find ways, again, like as I mentioned, like the win-win-win situation, right? Like find something where everybody could win. So, at that time, this is 2016-ish, right? And a lot of companies were, not as much as 2020, but we're trying to find ways to like help bring more black talent, like a lot of tech companies, not just Microsoft, but across the board. And so like, I saw like part of the problem, like you can't just show up at HBCU and be like, we're gonna rake up all the talent, right? Like we need to build a relationship. And so one of the things I tried to pitch when I could was a long game view of what we needed to do with this engagement. That we can't just show up one fall and then not show up again, right? To try to build that connection. But again, with doing that, I think the critical thing is like, okay, so how does the company benefit from this, right? And so as we not only get more candidates, right, like we're building a relationship and Microsoft is seen as accessible and safe. And so like there's even a branding benefit to it as well, where Microsoft is seen as like a place that I could go to, which didn't seem like that was part of the mindset, before we showed back up again. The other thing that I'll say too, and like, I took some risks. So one of the things that helped around the time, and I hit this slide, but I'm gonna see if I can find it and show it. All right, so I have another story to tell. All right, so around that time was when, Kaepernick was taking a knee and getting a lot of attention for it, right? And so at that time, I'm like, yeah, man, like I'm gonna kneel with Cap, right? And I'm like, I'm gonna buy a jersey to show my solidarity. And I don't know if y'all know how much those jerseys cost, but they're like really expensive. So it was expensive enough to cause me to reevaluate how am I gonna actually kneel with this man, right? But one of the things that I realized is that like what he did was just simply take a risk in where he was with his job. Like that was literally all he did. And so then I was like, well, what would it look like for me to do that, right? And that was kind of what predicated asking for that 10% time. I'll be honest, also around that time, that was when I got promoted to senior engineer. And like, you know, it's not that high up, but it's kind of like I'm established as an engineer. And so I felt like I had a little bit more capital to spend in that area. And honestly, like if I didn't get it, I was just gonna walk away, right? That was where I was in my career at that time, that I certainly was not earlier on and didn't want to take that risk. But at that time, like I was willing to do it. Yeah. So I don't know, that doesn't directly answer your question, but like, okay, yeah. Right. Okay.
I would literally I would be the brain behind it. I would be the coordinator, maintain the corporate relationship.
Yeah.
But I would have to find somebody else or other people who were just as passionate about teaching someone or developing young minds. Like, I would have to.
And one thing I'll say too, then like, there could be a whole lot of different opportunities for you, and it doesn't have to look like my story, right? Like yours could look differently. It just depends on what's around you. I don't know who raised it. Oh, yes, ma'am.
So it seems like you almost created 3 different programs. I just want to kind of clarify. So it seems almost as if you had a interviewing program, a internship program, and then some people that came back for jobs. So were those 3 completely separate things, or just it kind of happened in that way?
So the internship program and the full-time thing is something that's a company-wide thing. Like I don't run that, right? Like, and that's a really, really big operation. Like, you know, so Microsoft is a really large company. We literally have thousands of interns every summer. So like that's its own operation. The thing that I contributed more to was the interview part, and that's the thing that is in common between both the internship and the full-time opportunities. So in order to be, you know, in order to get an offer, you need to be able to interview well, right? To demonstrate the skills and experiences that you have that could be relevant and competitive for the role. So that was like the gap that I tried to fill. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'm trying to still figure out my question. I'm looking to build out an apprenticeship program. I'm in a startup, and I mean, you did everything that I've been talking about wanting to do. I was building something similar at Warner Media before I left. And what advice or mentorship can you provide somebody trying to reach out and as a hiring manager, create something similar? So like if I'm a small company, I'm thinking, how do I create my curriculum, if you will, so that somebody coming into Gooder could also go to a Microsoft or a Warner Media afterwards?
Oh yeah, sorry, thank you. Yeah. So the question was, how would I, like, what advice would I give to someone who is trying to build that connection as a hiring manager? Yeah.
So my job to be done would be to hire somebody to work at Gooder, but also to grow their career, to move to a bigger company. And so who should I be talking to as I'm, like, if we're not open source, we don't have the ability to say, hey, you can fix these bugs and show people. What advice do you have for somebody in that?
Right. All right, so then to repeat the question again, like, so as a hiring manager, like what? Yeah. What advice would I give to someone who's trying to help, like, give opportunities for people to not only like come to your organization and thrive, but then also be able to help build their career as they could go somewhere else? Yeah. So, I mean, honestly, my question would be like, so what do you have in your hands, right? What things can you provide a student that could be different than what other people could provide, right? Which could be interesting. Or if it's something that you can do that other folks can do too, then like, how could you partner with other companies, other organizations to do it? Yeah, and so like unfortunately I don't know enough about your organization, and and part of the reason I gave that disclaimer at the beginning because like a lot of my story was pretty bespoke to my situation, and I couldn't plan it, right? Like I didn't. As I was making the talk, I was like, I don't have a blueprint to give, right? Like the best way I could give was like these 3 things to kind of like make it a thing. But like honestly, it just came to like, who are the people around me, and how could I collaborate with them to reach my goal? So maybe one thing I would say is like, so then what is your goal, right? Like my goal was to help increase the number of Black engineers at Microsoft. Like, I guess that was the North Star, but there was a company.
To create opportunity, not so much for college students, but for people trying to break into tech.
Okay.
Maybe who have alternative education backgrounds. I was
Yeah.
self-taught, I had trouble moving around. And so for me, I'm starting a meetup group.
Yeah.
I'm looking to work with the Atlanta Tech College.
Yeah.
So, or General Assembly.
Yeah.
But I want to partner with other companies to then say, how do I make sure that when I hire somebody, if they don't move forward at Gooder, they can move forward someplace else and have that resume so they don't.
Yeah. Then two more responses I have, and then I see your hand up, or I see a few hands up. One is it could help to maybe like limit the scope of the people that you want to connect with, right? So instead of just anybody try to break into tech, maybe there's a certain segment, and then if you have that certain segment that you can identify that works with what Gooder can offer, then perhaps there is an existing community that you can find and connect with like. It would have to be probably another long game play, right? It's not going to be like, I'm going to show up and then, but like, what is it like to build connections, to build trust, to build relationships? Then the other thing too, then you would also probably, maybe even before you do that, is think about like, what opportunities do you have to build their careers at your company? And then that can help set expectations for the people who will be coming to you, as you can articulate what you can offer them. Yeah. Oops. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Oh.
I just want to, I love the work that you have done. I love the fact that it came from an authentic and passionate place. And I know that you caveated by saying that it was something that was really organic and that it like just developed. My question, and my background is in DEI, and so this is going to be like a little long, is have you found, or like, have you thought about how confirmation bias might play in to the experiences of the people that you are bringing into the organization in terms of the idea that like programs like this are great for corporations because what it says is I'm going to fix a person and that person is the problem versus the organization has problems that we need to fix. And when we do create programs like this, what we do is substantiate the fact that people of color, and we'll speak specifically about Black people because we're talking about HBCUs here, that there needs to be an additional level of investment in order to make those type of people be successful. And so my question is, have you thought about that and the implications of that and what happens to people who come through programs who have that both in like that aspect for them and then for the people who are hiring them so that's one what you think about that and what could be done about it, and then two, what opportunities exist in this model to disrupt that thinking? So for example, it's not that it's because it's HBCU, but it's because there's a certain segment of population that goes to this school that are first generation students. And also exactly what you said before, which I'm going to highlight because that's really important, around the fact that I don't have a network the way that you may have a network. And how do you raise those things so that people can see past the HBCU and past the color into all of the other systemic things that are going?
So, so the first question was...
Sorry, because I know.
I think, so it'll be a conversation. Okay, so the first question was like, what are the ways that confirmation bias could show up in this story, right? And what are the ways that like and with that...
Like basically that the talent is...
Right, that the idea of... Right.
Because they are Black students or because they came from...
Right. So I think there's two things with that. Like one, I think... I'm gonna do a both ends. So I would say, at least in this particular story, I think the additional investment was appropriate, and I also think that the additional investment was appropriate, and it wasn't FAMU's fault. And so in that case, like that was part of my push of like, how do we create this network, right? Like how do we create this virtuous cycle so that the things that I haven't heard anybody directly and explicitly identify in these other high-tech universities, right? Like where there is this constant connection, whether it's research, where there's internships, where there's alumni coming back all the time, right? Like, I'm trying to build something similar with FAMU, right? Like, specifically with the tech part. Because there are some connections between FAMU and Microsoft in other ways with business and other stuff too. But tech in particular. The second thing is that for the candidates who got hired that I was connected to, I did, when I could, try to, for lack of better words, I guess, scout out, right, the environment that they're in. And some of that, and the rest of my answer that I'll give is kind of limited to that, like, yeah, I was not a junior engineer, I was senior, but I wasn't that senior, and I wasn't in leadership. And so this story basically is the story of, like, what did I have in my hand, right? And I, used what I could. So, like, I went further and provided a lot of mentoring to students who came in to make sure that when they came into Microsoft, they could land on both feet and stay there. And some of the mentoring was around, like, professional stuff, like how do you interact with coworkers, how do you deal with different situations, sometimes more technical of, like, just actual doing the job. And then a lot of times too, which, like, first gen, whatever else, right, like, for a lot of these students, and myself included, right, like, making way more money than I expected to make coming out of college, right? Like, how can we make sure that doesn't mess them up as well, right? Like, because there's more responsibility that has nothing to do with the job, but it could impact their success at the company. And so when I found ways to, like, integrate them into my network at Microsoft and introduce them to people as they moved out there, like, those are the ways that I could do it in my hand. And then I forgot your second question. Oh, and confirmation bias too. So the other thing I would say that was bigger than me is that, like, there are pockets of the company, and I would say with a lot of different tech companies, as Black people are becoming more senior and coming into leadership roles, we're having opportunities to, like, push to, like, help change the culture. And fortunately, like, it's not just Black people, right? Like, everybody is trying to do this at the company. And, I am happy to say that at least with the alums who have come into the company that I've stayed in contact with, like, they have had good experiences with their manager, for the most part. I have also no problem, especially once they're in, helping them find other opportunities, right? And again, that was what was in my hand as a senior. Like, I'm not gonna go in and fight, right? Like, I'm gonna be like, this company is big enough, let's go over here, right? Like, let's find, and then again, now that they're within my network, I can use my network to their advantage. So, yeah. Yep. Yes, ma'am.
How did you go about selecting FAMU as the HBCU you wanted to work with? Was it specifically, like, their program at the school, or what sparked your interest?
That was just, like, the opportunity that came up. So, like, it was a random email sent to my team, and I was like, I know FAMU is an HBCU, so I'm gonna pick it up. So, like, Microsoft has a big recruiting operation with a lot of different universities, and so, like, emails come out about that all the time for different schools because, like, they need people to show up. But usually I ignore them, but that one I chose because it was an HBCU. So if it was another HBCU, I probably would have chose that, but that was one that came in my inbox. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Quick random questions. So, like, during these interviews, were y'all strategic, or do y'all try to make sure, like, the interview panel was diverse to kind of, remove certain bias when it came to, like, interviewing candidates?
Yeah, the question was, as we brought in candidates for interviews, what did we do to help, I guess, reduce bias, or I guess have a diverse slate of interviewers to kind of reduce that bias? So that's another thing that was outside of my control. Like, I think the way that I tried to contribute to that was becoming an interviewer, right? And, which was cool, for what it was, but then I wasn't seeing Black candidates, and that's how the story kicked off, right? But I would say, like, company-wide, there is a general effort to make that happen, but, like, it's a chicken and egg thing. Like, we need a more diverse workforce in order to have a more diverse slate of interviewers, right? So, like, we got to start somewhere, but it is something that the company cares about. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I was curious. I mean, at least the story as I gathered it from what you told, this was all you doing this work? Was anyone else from Microsoft contributing other than giving you the space?
Yeah. So I would say for outside of the recruiting team, certainly as an engineer, I was one of the more consistent. Anytime Microsoft went on campus, I made sure I was on that trip, right? But there were ways that other people got involved. So some of the interviewers who did that interview prep event with me with the professor were engineers who came on previous trips, right? So, like, they kind of had a connection. Another thing too was that as other, some engineers, when they came with me, especially after the first couple of times, and we're on campus doing different things, and they're like, oh wow, like we like what you're doing, how can we get more involved? I'm like, bet, right? Like what are the things that we can do? So sometimes when candidates would fly to Seattle for final round interviews and I wasn't available or I couldn't be around, I would ask them to show up, right? To be a friendly, familiar face from somebody that they've seen on campus before. So there are other ways. And then like with my team that I was on, as Ed was sharing, I found ways to incorporate my team to contribute without having to fly to Tallahassee, right? So like asking, like when we did that interview event, like I sent an email to my team, I was like, give me your interview advice, right? And I was able to like compile that into the thing we put together. So like it's like big and small ways of getting other people involved.
I guess it's like a kind of follow-up, because you mentioned Ed, one of the questions in my head was, when he was speaking, he said that 10% feels like nothing. Mm-hmm. When you heard that, did you think you should ask for more?
Yeah, like I could haggle a little bit more. I was satisfied with the 10% for me. And one conversation I think I had with Ed before was like, so I mean, I didn't want to do too much more, right? Like I am an engineer. I want to be an engineer. I love being an engineer, right? And one of the things that I learned from a couple of the trips too was that in having some conversations with students that I was the first Black software engineer that they met. And I was like, oh, right? In 2016, so with that, like it felt really important that I could show up still as an engineer and not be too recruiter that I'm not engineer. That they can have visibility of like, this is what it looked like to do the job. When I would come on campus and have talks, like I could talk about the work that I'm doing, right? Like, this is the bug that I checked in yesterday before I got on the plane. Stuff like that, so that it could still be accessible in that way.
Yeah. I think you would have burned yourself out, and then it never would have snowballed itself into being what it became.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Thank you. Thank you.